So last month I did my favorite series of all time, which was incredibly difficult. But I think this was more difficult, and that was coming up with my favorite standalone books. And to me, all these are standalones. If no other books were ever made in the same world or in the same series, I would be content. They are complete thoughts, and to me, they are standalones right now. I could see the argument to be made for some of these not being standalones, and I just don't care. My channel, my rules. And I couldn't think of 10, I could only think of 12, and I didn't think of enough to have like a sci-fi list and a fantasy list. So this is a speculative standalone list. And it was really hard. Whereas with series, I'm like, oh, I can actually see like who my top 3 series are. Like things naturally divided themselves. Here I was like, I don't know. Like it was really difficult. So that said, this is fluid. Changes from day to day. It is what it is. Some of these might go up or down depending on what rereads do to them, because the one thing that does apply to all of these books is I have either reread them or I will reread them because I love them so much. So starting with number 12, it's a book I actually don't talk a lot about in the channel because I read it before the channel and I want to reread it. I ordered a special edition. I still don't have that special edition. It was supposed to be shipped in like April, and then they say they would ship it in August. It's September. But that's The Library at Mount Char. This is the normal cover. I'm not going to show you the one that I purchased. This is the one you would see in stores. And it's a wild time. All the content and trigger warnings for graphic violence and gore and anything you can think of if you are someone who has triggering thoughts around those things. For me, I don't visualize a lot when I read, so a lot of those more graphic, violent things kind of just wash over me. But it was wild, and I had a lot of fun. I remember picking it up because it was like one of those recommendations on the fantasy subreddit, and I was just like, sure, I'll give it a try. Came in from the library, and I like read it in 2 days, and it was so fun and unique. This is, I guess, fantasy first, but there's a lot of like sci-fi and horror also mixed in. It's definitely one of the few revenge stories that I love. Our main character wants to get back at her father figure, and she does it by kind of using the powers of the cosmos against him. I don't even know how to describe the plot of this book, okay? It's just a time, okay? It's page-turny. It's a time. There are lions. It's a lot. So I want to reread it because I want to re-experience the chaos that is this book. But I'm waiting for the edition that I ordered because I spent money on that. And I would like to have that in my hand when I talk about it, and then maybe one day do a more coherent review. That's another thing about this list, is either I already have a review for these books on my channel, or the reason I don't have a review is like, I don't know how to talk about my favorites in a coherent way other than like, this is great. I loved it. Which, you know, directly applies also to the next 2 on this list that I have read since having the channel, but have not made standalone reviews for. Number 11 is The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. It's my favorite Sarah Gailey, hands down. Nothing else that I have read by them has quite matched this level of awesome. And this was another one of those books that I just kind of let myself pick up. It like was at the library on our new release shelf, and I was like, I don't want to work on my dissertation today. I will take this book off the shelf and read it. And I read it in like 24 hours because I could not put it down. To me, it was the definition of a book that made me want to read. I didn't want to do anything else. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to read this book and see what happened to this very odd protagonist. And she's an interesting woman. So this book is about a woman whose expertise is in cloning and genetics, and her husband kind of uses her research to make the perfect version of herself as his wife. This is not a spoiler. The cover is 2 rings. It's about cloning. That happens, like, you know about that within, like, the first chapter. Now, what's interesting is that our main character, who does not have good feelings towards her husband for leaving her for a clone of herself, obviously, gets a call from his new wife. And that's where the story takes off. And it is a very interesting commentary on nature versus nurture, what makes something worthy of human dignity. The ending is one of the few times I like put down a book and I just was like, what? And it's not because it's like, I don't want to say that and make you think there's just like this big moment. It's a very subtle what? but it made me like put the book down, walk around the room. I was just like, how? I need to find people who had read this book to be like, that ending, right? That ending. And that doesn't happen to me all the time. This is, I think people tell me, closer to psychological thriller if you are more in the thriller subgenre of things. I don't know a lot about thriller books. This had the sci-fi element. It had a character who I found fascinating to follow and unpack their baggage and how they processed information. I think that's really what hooked me. Everything else was kind of aesthetic, but following this main character was fascinating and is why it's one of my favorite standalone books. I own a copy, and because, to me, my enjoyment of this thriller was not tied to a twist. It has rereadability. Like, I could probably spend some time in her messed up head again, if that makes sense. Number 10. I don't know how to talk about this book other than, like, squeal. I love this book. I can't wait to read more by this author because this has potential to be a new favorite author, and that's Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I love the movie Stardust. It's based off a book by Neil Gaiman. I really dislike that book by Neil Gaiman because that book does not have the whimsy that the movie does. So one could argue Stardust is not a very good adaptation of the source material because it adds in tone that does not exist in the book. But that tone of like an adult fairy tale, romp with characters, found family, that with a slight dark fairy tale aesthetic is what Nettle and Bone is, and I eat that stuff up. It has like the slowest slow burn romance to the point where I wouldn't even call this a romance book. Like, I would not give this to someone who's like, oh, I need a romance. Like, if you like strong slow burn romance in your stories, it was fulfilling to me. But I mostly just loved the humor. I loved the character banter. It was just the appropriate length. This is less than 300 pages. I don't think it's a novella. I think it's a little longer than that. But it's like the perfectly constructed length for the story that she's trying to tell. And I really identify with the 30-year-old character. I know not everyone does. I know some people think that she is written too young. I think how she thinks really lines up with what I think, which I don't know what that says about me, but I really identified with this 30-year-old character trying to figure out her place in things, how to best problem solve and affect change, actionable change. I really liked her. Number 9 is, I knew this had to be on the list because I've read it like 4 times, but it was hard figuring out where to put it because it's been a while since I've reread it, and this is one of the ones where I'm like, yeah, it's not going to be a standalone forever, but it's been a standalone since like 2008 or 2009, and that's Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is, oh gosh, I haven't done a Cosmere ranking in a long time, like in 2 years, but this is usually one of my middle of the road Cosmere books. I really like it. It's cozy. It's so cozy to me. It's got a lot of tropes. Like, I never even thought of it as a young adult crossover till I was on book 2, but it makes sense. It has Beauty and the Beast retelling tropes. Like, it's all up in there when you have like a princess that has to go away to a kingdom and be with this god who she doesn't want to be with. Like, it's got that trope. But also it has Sanderson's really cool magic, and it has this sword that I really like. And for me, it has the plotting and pacing of a Sanderson that I enjoy. So it's cozy. I haven't read it in a while. I'm trying to remember the last time I read it. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know when I'll get to a reread of it. I should reread it probably before the 5th Stormlight book comes out. So we'll see if I get to it next year or the year after that. But like, I've read it 3 or 4 times. I just have a cozy time with it. I mesh with how Sanderson does dialogue. I know it's not something that everyone works with, but I will say, if you don't like Sanderson's dialogue, that does not improve in this book. This book is, I believe, closer to the dialogue that people tend to actively not like, personally, based off reviews I have seen, because it has a lot of his humor, which seems to be a make or break deal for some people. Now, number 8 is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. I just saw the long list for the Hugos, and I'm still so sad. Anyways, this book is speculative. We're not going to try to genre box it. We have Vern. When you first meet Vern, she is in a forest giving birth to her twins. And then you kind of learn, where's Vern from? Vern's having some weird things happening to her, and she's seeing some weird things, so we're trying to unpack that. Vern meets some people, you got some found family stuff, and there's just always this tension of running away from something. And I'm being vague because it's kind of fun to discover things. This is a book that is equally fun and engaging to read, at least for me and my taste, but also thematically rich and beautifully written. It's the entire package, and I can't wait to reread it, and I have a stunning, beautiful copy. I had to read the e-arc when I first read it, and then I got a physical copy, and I'm very excited to reread it because, I don't know, even knowing the answers, I want to spend time with these characters. There were moments when I read this story, and I just was like, oh, that was so sweet. Like, there were just character interaction moments that I live for that existed in Sorrowland that I can't wait to re-experience one day. Number 7's a very, very new edition, which is why it's number 7 and not higher. Time will tell if it goes lower or higher, but it felt right to put it here for now, and that's Light from Uncommon Stars. I love this book. Like, I mean, I totally get it. I keep saying this. I totally get it if you don't like this. I don't really care if you don't like this book. I love it, and I'm obsessed. Like, it, to me, does what it's trying to do perfectly, and that happened to be exactly what I wanted to read it when I picked it up. That's all I have. I love the commentary on music. I love the found family aspects. I love how we have the immigration discussion about people who are refugees coming from other countries here, but it's actually just legitimately aliens. Like, it's just, I loved that. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. I have a copy. I've almost purchased the paperback copy, which is the same cover as the hardback. It's just like a slightly different, like, filter. That's how much I really like this book. I need to read the backlist of this author. I just heard that she has a new book coming out, and I'm excited. I'm truly excited. It worked so well for me, and I think part of what worked really well for me in this book is that it's genre fiction. It's speculative. We've got deals with the devil, we've got aliens, we've got space travel, like, it's speculative. But it also speaks to what I love in contemporary literary fiction. And I think just, I don't get to get the entire package all the time. Like, usually it's one or the other, and this author's a poet, and I felt that, and I resonated with it. I also don't get to love writing styles that often. It doesn't happen to me very often. I have very few authors who I can be like, I love their writing style. That is the number one reason that I like them. And she's one of them now. I really like this book. Have a standalone review. I've been talking about this nonstop since I've read it, and it was so close to winning the Hugos. So close. I don't know if this is going up before or after my Hugo reaction video, but I do have a Hugo reaction video either in the works or already out. If it's already out, the link will be down below. Number 6 is a book that I am so sad that 2020 did dirty. And I have been seeing people in my circles picking it up and reading it and connecting with it, so it brings me joy. This is another author whose writing style I just, like, connect with, and that's The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. Another book that is very hard to talk about. I think sometimes I like things that are very hard to articulate because it's not a vibe. There's a plot here, and there are characters to love, but it's not like... It's not a plot that lends itself to description via tropes or general accepted narrative archetypes. That's probably why it's really hard. This is a sci-fi story where you first are introduced to multiple perspectives and you don't really know what you're being introduced to. It's a little more jarring than just your typical multi-POV sci-fi story. But it does all come together because in our present day of this sci-fi story, we are following this spaceship have precious cargo, I guess I will say to be vague, and it's in the context of this capitalistic corporation-run government system. And it's just a very humanized way of looking at capitalism in this galaxy. It's about how we got here. It's about the decisions we make in the families we form for ourselves. It's beautiful. Yeah, that's probably the shortest way I can describe this book that I love and cannot wait to reread. And I am just instantly buying without knowing anything about any other work that this author puts out. He puts out a short story, I'm going to go find the short story. He puts out a novel, I'm going to go find the novel. Like, even if he puts out a poem, which I don't usually read poems, like, that's how much I connected with his use of words and sentence structure. Like, it was effortless to consume, but also beautiful, which doesn't happen to me very often because that's not actually one of my highest criteria for a reading experience, probably because it doesn't happen to me that often. And now we are in the top 5, which was hard, and I'm not super confident about any of it, but most of these I have reread or plan to reread in the next year or so. Number 5 is Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lord. I love this story. I've read it twice. So it wasn't a fluke of just like being surprised when I first read it. Because sometimes that can happen. It's like a favorite is like, man, I wasn't expecting such a great experience. Which was the case when I first read it. And then I reread it like my birthday last year. I have like a birthday reading vlog that I did last year, which was super fun. And still obsessed. I love folktales. I love Caribbean folktales. I grew up with a musical that is based off a book written by a Trinidad author, so a lot of the tropes that are in this book I've actually been very familiar with a lot of my life. And also a lot of the tropes I think are familiar to Western readers as well, in terms of like, yeah, this is how folktales go. We are talking about a moral, and we know we're talking about how this person represents the antithesis of that moral, like. But then it subverts that because Karen Lord is brilliant. So I love the subversion of the typical folktale while being true to what is wonderful about that. I love Pama. Pama is a quiet, strong protagonist that I truly enjoy following. The overarching narrator is hysterical to me. I think it's just Karen Lord's authorial voice makes me laugh. I chuckle inside. I'm like hanging out with a friend when I read her works. And that's what makes this book stick with me. And it goes a lot of places. I can definitely see the critiques of like, I don't really know what this was doing or why we went here. I liked it more in this part than that part. Sure, I get that. I think because I like the author's voice, I was just immersed the entire time, both times that I read it. It's great for me. And number 4, spoiler alert, another Karen Lord. Now this one I haven't reread, but I do hold that it's my favorite Karen Lord. And that's The Best of All Possible Worlds. Yeah, this one I need to reread to see if it goes up or down on this list one day. But it met me in my moment, and I've never read anything like it, and I always constantly am like, I kind of want to read this book. I don't know why. There's something wrong with me, with that I just don't let myself pick up this book to reread. But I, like a lot of people, grew up with television that was very serialized, right? I grew up with the classic dramas like CSI Miami. That's not a classic drama, but, like serialized television like that. And, like, one of my favorites is Bones. And, in Bones, there's the will they, won't they of Booth and Bones the entire time. And they will one day, but there's the will they, won't they. And that's the similar romantic vibe that was in this. And it felt like watching a season of television in one book. And it was very wholesome and fun, and I got to watch these two characters keep stumbling into and off of each other until they both realized that they were connected. I loved that. And on top of that, it's this very wonderful, lush world. So the premise of it is there's this group of people who can no longer live on their planet because of warfare. And so this other planet takes them in as refugees. And it's such a wonderful idea of, okay, we can choose, you can choose to assimilate with what we have set up, but we would prefer to have you get to keep what is culturally important to you, but also you can't, supplant or take over. Like, we have to figure out how to build that into our system. And so one of these characters from this culture is paired up with an anthropologist scientist, and they travel to try and find the people that are more genetically similar, because at this point humanity has kind of split into 3 genetic pathways, and there's like psychic powers and things. And on these travels of finding people and asking people, hey, do you want to be a part of this? Because another part is that they lost a large portion of the female population, so natural reproduction is a problem for this species. Well, species is the wrong word, but for this segment of the human race. And on this journey, we have this team that I get to fall in love with, like I do in a serialized drama like Bones, and then I have this romance that I get to watch blossom. And it's 300 pages. And I got to experience essentially the catharsis that I get from a season of TV, but a season of TV maybe that doesn't go on for 12 seasons, in one book. And I loved it. So, I don't know. It's definitely a very me book. There's no universe in which I expect it to have mass market appeal, but it's one of my favorites. And number 3 is definitely a me book. No one else puts this book this high on any list. And it's Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. I'm an Elantris apologist, apparently? I don't know. Elantris gets a bad rep on the internet, and every time someone tells me that they like Elantris, I get a little happy because so many people don't. I don't know. I've read it 4 or 5 times. I think 4 times. I love it every time. I've loved it after reading all of other Sanderson's works. It was my first one. I read it when it first came out because the prologue is amazing. I feel like most people agree. It's a pretty good prologue. But it was also my first time seeing characters that I related to. Both Rodin and Serene I find incredibly relatable, specifically Serene, too. I mean, I read it when I was 15 or 14, I think. When was 2005 in my life? Maybe I was 14. I think it was on the eve of my 14th birthday. And I met Serene, and I'm like, oh, you can be feminine, but also strong and have these masculine... it's not the deepest form of that, but it was a nuanced take on the not like other girls trope that I really resonated with. I was like, I see myself in this character. And also, the mystery of the book is just so fun to me. I just had a blast with it. It's a cozy time. I will be so happy for the day that this is not a standalone and that we have more books in this world, because it's the book series where I love the characters and I wish to go back to them. What critiques I do have is I think the ending is way too rushed. I think the ending is like super fast, and that's probably why I can't put it up higher, because it's just like one of the like blink and you miss it endings that I've ever read. Like, it's that type of fast. But in general, I love Rodin. I love Serene. I even have come to like Hrathen, who is on most people's first read everyone's least favorite. But he's also grown on me, probably because I'm older now. He's definitely not a character that I think would resonate with a 14-year-old on average. And so, yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it holds a special place in my heart. It's a book that made me realize, oh, I can read adult books that aren't what are given to me at school and have a good time. It's also that for me. It's a nostalgic pick. It's nostalgic, and I have fun with it right now. Now, if I picked it up for the first time today, what would I think about it? We'll never know. Can't do that problem. Can't read that in a vacuum. Number 2, okay. 2 and 1 were hard. 2 and 1 were so difficult, and I basically went with the reread got number 1, and number 2 hasn't been reread yet. And number 2 is The Sword of Kaigen. I think about this book, and for me, capital for me, I know there's a lot of discourse, a lot of people go, like, they nitpick at it, whatever. It is perfect. There is not a thing I would change about it. As of my first read of it, I love the epilogue. The epilogue made me laugh. The epilogue helped me heal. Everyone who hates the epilogue, I just don't care. I like that. The superhero stuff that Alan makes fun of, I love that. That was so fun. I enjoyed that to the nth degree. I love a good expedition world info dump. I was all here for that. That school scene that everyone hates, perfection. I loved that. I don't think you were supposed to actually pay attention to the lecture. That wasn't the point of that scene. Anyways, that book is perfect to me. Every negative people bring up, I'm like, that was actively a thing that while I was reading it, I was like, yes, I'm so glad this is here. So for me, for my taste, for my favorite books list, it's this high up. It's one of the few books that emotionally hit me so hard that I had to put it down for a day. I don't do that very often. I don't get emotionally affected by that many books. It just doesn't happen that often. I get emotionally affected by other media significantly more than books. Probably because I think music is a bigger tie to my emotional center. So if it's like a musical or a really beautiful score in a movie, those are better at evoking emotion than a book. So when a book does that for me, it's a big deal. So that's why it's here. Could it go up or down on reread? Will I see more flaws on a reread? Will I just reinforce my love? Who knows? I need to get myself... I think I did buy myself an e-copy. I haven't bought myself a paperback yet. But it was a fantastic time, and it had to surpass the hype. The hype train for this book when I read it was over the roof, and I was like so nervous because hype, it's a double-edged sword. Been in a lot of lives lately where I've talked about hype. One by accident, one on purpose. And I had all of this hype. I was really nervous, and I still loved it as much as I did. That's a really good book for me. Now, I don't know if anyone's guessed the number 1. I don't know if this is as easy of a list for people to guess based off my taste, instead of the series one, but this is Middle Game by Shauna Maguire. And I'm ignoring the fact that it's in a series. I really haven't liked anything else in this world except for Middle Game. So in my head, Middle Game exists on its own until the series redeems itself, or maybe, the series never redeems itself, and that's fine because at least I have Middle Game, okay? That's where I'm at. And I have... Middle Game is my comfort food. Middle Game is to me with books as Pacific Rim is to me with movies. And I love Pacific Rim. I don't know how many people know that, but I'm obsessed with that movie. Do I think it's the best movie of all time? Probably not. But do I rewatch it more than any other film? Yes, Yes, I do. And that's similar to Middle Game because it just does something. It makes me connect, and it makes me happy, and it makes me engaged and emotional in a way that I want to be while I am reading. A lot of that is Roger and Dodger. Actually, all of that is Roger and Dodger. I can definitely objectively see that the world building and the plot is not like the thing. But that's how much I love Roger and Dodger. I live off of strong platonic relationships in books. There actually really aren't that many. I mean, there are, but not as many that convince me that I love them as much as they love each other, if that makes sense. So Roger and Dodger they're really strong together on the page, but they also remind me of me and my best friend, who I love dearly, and like getting to see that like unapologetic ride or die love for someone in your life when it's not a romantic bond. I don't get to read that often. It's not like something I crave all the time, but the fact that I could see myself and my best friend in a book, and that I had a great time with the book, and that I was so nervous and so stressed the entire time, and the whole like being brought together and pushed apart and brought together, like the way that mimics life. I love this book. I love it a lot. And it's very personal why I love it. And that's probably why I put this above Sword of Kaigen, because I was worried on reread that I wouldn't like it as much, It was a flash in the pan, I didn't expect it. There's no way now knowing how it ends it would matter. No. I loved it even more. I think even the parts that I didn't like as much on a first read, I was like, no, I'm cool with it now. I'm cool with it. Because I am so focused in on this. And yeah, I don't know. And that's why I didn't like Seasonal Fears. Not to get onto Seasonal Fears, it's just that those two characters were not Roger and Dodger. They weren't even close. So that is the top 12. I recommend all of these with any caveats that I have said while making this video, because I recognize that especially as we get to the top of the list, things are personal. Things are very specifically to my taste as a reader. But if we are more often than not book twins, you really should try some of these out. So that's this video. If you want to leave an emoji, I don't know. Leave something indigo for redemption in Indigo, because that's what I read when I looked down at my notepad. Let me know some of your favorite standalones that maybe I should be checking out. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.